you will place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matter pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. If you will state your name for the record, please.
My name is Dr. Jacquelyn Zahm.
All right, and Ms. Gropper, I'll let you proceed.
Good morning.
We've stipulated to your qualification as an expert, but because the jury's had the benefit of hearing from other experts and their background, could you tell the jury a little bit about your education and experience with regard to forensic psychology?
Yes, can I just ask, is this too loud? Am I
No.
vibrating anyone's eardrums?
I think it's okay.
Okay,
I can turn it down a little bit if you're uncomfortable.
thank you. My undergraduate degree is from Georgia College and State University. I have a Bachelor of Science with a major in psychology. My graduate training is from Georgia School of Professional Psychology at Argosy, Atlanta. Throughout my graduate training, we're first required to become generalists as psychologists. So we all have very similar training in terms of our graduate school training. However, during all of my practicum and in-person kind of hands-on learning opportunities, I focused on evaluation and assessment. So that has been where my training has primarily focused. My residency was at Mississippi State Hospital, which is right outside of Jackson, Mississippi. In Mississippi, it's similar to Georgia Regional. It's the state psychiatric hospital where individuals are treated for severe and pervasive mental illness, including individuals who have been forensically committed or who have been found in need of treatment to be restored to competency, or are being housed after being found not guilty by reason of insanity. So my residency included forensic rotation on a forensic ward where I provided group and individual counseling for competency restoration, as well as involvement in evaluations to determine both competency to stand trial and criminal responsibility. During that time, I also completed an external private rotation that focused on the similar referral questions. Since that time, I came back to Georgia, completed my postdoctoral training at Georgia Psychological, which is where I was employed when I initially conducted this evaluation. Throughout my time there, I served as clinical director over a small clinic of approximately 5 assessors, evaluators. Most of my work there involved juvenile court as well as some family court and some cases similar to this one. All of my experience since completing my graduate training has involved evaluation and assessment, so that is kind of where my expertise lies.
Okay, and when you use the terminology evaluation and assessment, what do you mean by that?
Psychological evaluation, psychosexual risk offender evaluations, domestic violence, substance abuse, questions regarding parental fitness or risk for child abuse, as well as criminal responsibility. Also, the question that is before this court, whether someone is criminally responsible, although those do come to us far less frequently because they are not presented to the court in as higher numbers as we see these other referral questions.
Okay, so the criminal responsibility assessments you do come in smaller numbers than the other types of assessments?
Far smaller numbers, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit about your evaluation in this case. The court's kind of told the jury that the law provides that a neutral third-party doctor will conduct an evaluation. So we've never worked together before. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay. And you completed a 38-page report in this case, right?
That is correct.
And tell the jury a little bit about what you reviewed in this case in terms of collateral documentation apart from your actual evaluation of Ms. Driver.
Okay. For this case, I received extensive collateral documentation. I received, I believe it was approximately 1,200 pages of documentation pertaining to medical treatment. I received what I believe were all of the interviews of the parties who were present at the time that the alleged event occurred, including the interviews with Mr. Benjamin Ben Mikhail, the two ladies who were present in the home, Jessica and Sarah. I received interviews of Ms. Driver herself that were conducted by Detective Cruz, and I received the police narratives of all of those interviews as well as the actual interview itself. I also received some documentation of a handful of calls that were placed from the jail. I did not receive previously completed evaluations.
Okay. And your statement about not receiving previously completed evaluations at the time that you were conducting your evaluation, what was the reason for that?
So I'm not sure if they would have been provided to me or not, but I did request in this case that they not be provided to me, given that my role was to be a neutral evaluator. So I did not want to see the work of a previous evaluator and their conclusions.
Okay. And so did you conduct your evaluation and review of the material and complete this 38-page report, having no idea what the other doctors in the case had found?
So I was told that at the onset of the case, I was told that Ms. Driver had been evaluated twice, and that both evaluators agreed that she was suffering from severe mental illness, had a significant mental health history, but that they had differing opinions in some areas.
Okay. But beyond that, you had not reviewed their reports and
No.
specifically requested that you not receive them so you could conduct your independent analysis?
That is correct.
All right. And did you also, as part of your review of this case, receive information about things like her cell phone searches?
I did.
Okay. And any other potential video documentation?
I received a video that was taken, I believe, by Ms. Driver or by someone with Ms. Driver that occurred during what appeared to be a point where her daughter had been taken from her and she was not with her daughter and was attempting to go to a place to meet the father in order to be with her daughter.
Okay. I want to talk to you about your evaluation, your actual evaluation of Ms. Driver and your interaction with her.
Actually, can I add one more additional?
Yeah, of course.
That I did not mention. I apologize. I also received what I believe was a transcript. I'm sorry, not a transcript, but an audio recording of her conversation that appeared to have been taped by Mr. Benjamin Mikhail, where he had recorded various statements she had made in the time leading up to the alleged events.
Okay. And after you review, any idea how much time you spent reviewing all of that collateral documentation?
I would say between 10 and 16 hours.
Okay. And after did you review all that before you went to meet with Ms. Driver?
I did not review all of it before I went to meet with her. I believe that I had received it and had reviewed some, but I had not reviewed all of it before I met with her. Much of it was also reviewed multiple times.
Okay. And you, on page 19 of your report, you discussed sort of your behavioral observations and mental status of Ms. Driver when you actually went to go see her at the Cherokee County Adult Detention Center?
Yes.
All right. And is it fair to say that you notated in your report that you found Ms. Driver to be of above average intelligence?
I believe her to be of above average intelligence, yes.
And why did you reach that conclusion?
Well, she, reported to have done well in school and excelled academically before she dropped out, but also her communication is very sophisticated. Her language, her use of words, her vocabulary and use of vocabulary in conversation is, I believe, to be above average, as well as she's very articulate and detailed in describing things in a manner that would be consistent with at least average, more than likely above average intelligence.
Okay. You also indicated in your report that she was very much aware of the legal details surrounding her case. What did you mean by that?
She was very much aware that I would be conducting a third evaluation. She was very much aware that she had been evaluated previously on 2 different occasions. She was very much aware that my report would not be confidential, that it would be provided to the court, to the attorneys. She was very much aware of how to reach her attorney should she need to do so. She was also aware in a manner that was quite unique for someone in her situation, in that she spontaneously articulated that 3 years had passed since the offense occurred, alleged offense, and she recalled in much greater detail in terms of her own symptoms and what was going through her mind at the time in far greater detail in the previous evaluations that occurred sooner after the alleged event. So she herself had some concerns regarding, I guess the appropriate word would be the validity of this evaluation, given that so much time had passed.
Okay. And did you notate in your report sort of your lack of concerns with regard to her memory and her ability to recount certain things?
I perceived her to be able to recall things in great detail. I perceived her memory to be she was able to articulate very things well and seemed to have a very vivid memory for the circumstances leading up to the alleged offense.
All right. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your report as it relates to sort of getting background information about Ms. Driver before you kind of got into the substance of the offense and her mental state surrounding the offense. What did she describe to you about her childhood?
She described basically that she had grown up. She didn't use the word loving. It seemed as though her home may have not been particularly, there may not have been a lot of overtly expressed affection, but she seemed to perceive that she was well cared for, did not describe abuse by her parents, and perceived that her needs and most of her wants were provided.
Okay. She described herself as being boy crazy.
Yes.
Okay. She told you about moving in with boyfriends when she was 15 years old and then with a second boyfriend in 2017?
Yes, she described herself as being a difficult child to parent.
Okay. And she reported to you a lot of history of drug use with cocaine, ecstasy, MDMA?
She did report an extensive drug use starting at a very early age.
Okay. And she indicated that she had gotten some of those drugs from her boyfriends, but also gotten some of those drugs from her brothers?
I believe primarily her boyfriend. Her brothers maybe on a couple of occasions was my perception.
Okay. And she reported to you also that she was sexually abused by both of her brothers?
She didn't use those terms explicitly. It seemed that something had occurred. It didn't seem that she perceived it to be a malicious intent.
Okay. She told you that her brothers didn't know what they were doing when they hurt her? Okay. Specifically with regard to her relationship history with the 2 boyfriends she lived with prior to meeting Benjamin, isn't it true that she told you that she was becoming increasingly spiritual while she was dating them and feeling guilty about the life decisions she was making?
She did.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously she told you she met Benjamin and she started a relationship with him when she was 17, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. What did she tell you about sort of the relationship dynamics or the cult dynamics involving Jessica and Sarah and their feelings toward one another?
I believe her language, and I'd have to look back at my writing to be 100% accurate, but I believe the language that she used was that they came on soon after her, and initially she was okay with it. It seemed that contention primarily surfaced after the birth of her daughter, when she wanted to live as a family.
Okay. And just with regard to language, is it fair to say that on page 26 of your report, she told you that by the time the baby was 7 or 8 months old, she hated the other wives because they wanted to have a child with Z, and they hated her because she had a child with him first?
Correct.
Okay. And isn't it true that she expressed to you multiple times that you documented in your report her desire for stability and her desire to be able to give Hannah a normal life?
Correct.
And one of the things that you documented in your report is that he had kept promising her that he would give her a house and a community to raise her baby in.
Yes.
Okay. And did that seem to be of significant importance to her surrounding the dynamics of that relationship?
It did.
Okay. Isn't it true that in your evaluation of her, she had an extensive amount of knowledge surrounding sort of the, I don't know what to call it other than fraudulent conduct of the cult?
Can you repeat that?
She had an extensive knowledge of the conduct of this organization, how they got money, how they got cars, how they planned to get houses.
She did.
Okay.
She did, and it was very complex, such that it was confusing to me.
Okay. Did she try to explain it to you?
She did.
Okay. And in fact, she told you that they had all applied for COVID loans under each of their trusts, but she was the only one that got approved.
She did say loans. It may have been COVID. I would have to look back at my exact language, but I do recall the mention of loans that seemed to be very large sums of money that they had all applied for, and she was the only one who was approved, yes.
Okay. And she indicated that they had RVs and vehicles that they had no license and they had no insurance, but they would always get out of it when they got pulled over because they had the trust documentation.
Correct.
And she also told you that their plan of going from North Carolina down to Florida was because they planned to steal 2 houses with their trust that they located on Zillow.
Correct.
And she also indicated to you that they had previously gotten free vehicles utilizing this trust.
Correct.
And did she seem to have an extensive knowledge of sort of the inner workings of that?
She did.
I want to talk to you next about maybe some of the things that she represented to you that were not supported by the collateral documentation. I noted that one of the things in your report was that she told you when she was admitted into the hospital that she weighed 80 pounds. Is that fair?
I can't recall if she said when she was admitted to the hospital or or during the culmination of her struggles that led up to the alleged events, but she did note losing significant weight and weighing approximately 80 pounds.
Okay. And if your report said that she said when she was admitted to the hospital she was 80 pounds, do you have any reason to disagree?
I would not disagree with that.
Okay. And you actually notated in your report that you had the medical records, and her medical records indicated that she had normal BMI, right?
Correct.
And in the medical records, it also indicates that she wasn't 80 pounds, she was 113 pounds upon admission.
Yes, it had the kilograms, and I did have to do the conversion online. But yes, that is what I noted from her medical records.
Okay. So she had underreported to you that she was 33 pounds skinnier than what she actually was.
It seemed so based on the documentation that I had in the medical records as compared to her self-report.
Okay. That she was exaggerating how thin and frail she was?
That she was exaggerating or either had misperceived or either was representing a different point in time.
Okay. I want to talk to you about your review of her searches. I think you documented several of them in your 38-page report.
I did. Some were repeated and some were similar, so I don't think that I documented all of them, but I did document many of them, yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me that on November the 22nd and November the 23rd, she started searching things about whether she was sinning being with a married man, whether she was sinning having a baby with a married man.
Yes.
Okay. Was this consistent with her statements to you that she was starting to question sort of the ideological views of the cult?
Yes.
Okay. And those things were not related to any delusion she was having. She just indicated that they were related to her questioning the value system of the cult.
That was my perception, that she was questioning the beliefs that were being taught within the group.
Okay. And that was on November the 22nd, November the 23rd?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I'm not looking at the date, but that seems correct.
Sorry, do you have your report there?
I do.
It's on page 12. If that's
Thank you.
helpful.
If you
You're
can
welcome.
reference the page.
Yeah, of course. You're aware that on the 25th of November, 2 and 3 days after she was searching about whether she was sinning being in this group, she searched killing someone to save them.
Correct.
All right. And then you're aware that subsequently, 5 days after that, she was researching how to snap a neck and looking at websites about how hard it was to kill someone by breaking their neck.
Correct.
Okay. And then you're also aware that on the day that she killed Hannah, December the 8th, she was Googling how to get a bus ticket for a 13-month-old.
Correct.
And you indicated that you had seen the video from November the 27th where she says, "My name is Chloe Driver, he has my baby, I'm being forced to go against my will." Is that the video you're talking about?
Correct.
Right.
That is.
And she represented to you that she went back to him and her plan was to get her baby and run, right?
Correct.
Are you aware that after she went back to him, she did get her baby and then she returned to her mother's house for a couple of days?
I am.
Okay. And then he wanted to go look at some property in Knoxville, so she left with him again to go look at property in Knoxville.
Yes.
Okay. So the last time that she returned to him, she actually had the baby with her at her mom's house and she went to him to go look at property.
That was the way I interpreted her narrative, yes.
Okay. And in your review of all the medical records, you said you had 1,200 pages of medical records and collateral information. Is it fair to say that Ms. Driver, of her own volition, at multiple times refused any type of medication to treat any type of psychiatric condition?
That was reported in the medical records from the hospital, yes.
And that she specifically reported that it was against her belief system to take any of those medications?
That's what the hospital records indicate, yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about specifically the delusions that she reported that relate to Hannah. Well, first let me, let's do that. It's on page 31. Is it fair to say that as it relates to Hannah and sort of what she told you about her motivation for committing the act, that her delusion was that when she would breastfeed Hannah, she would sort of give Hannah all of her pain and all of her sin?
Yes.
Okay. And did she attribute that to be sort of one of the significant things telling her that she needed to kill Hannah?
It seemed to be a part of the rationale in her mind of why she needed to kill her daughter, yes. The narrative was very complex, and because the idea is not rational, it's very hard to restate it in terms that equate to rational thoughts. But that seems consistent with the narrative that she portrayed, yes.
Okay. And so you said that it was kind of hard to follow because there was more of a narrative than a concise individual
Correct.
thing. Was the overarching theme of the narrative she gave you that she wanted to kill Hannah to save her?
Correct.
Okay.
To save her from a life of pain and catatonic depression and abuse.
Okay. And is it fair to say that some of that was based upon sort of the reality that she was living in the cult dynamic?
It did seem that the reality in which she was living was all wrapped up in her thought processes as well. While some of the thoughts were irrational, some of the thoughts of feelings of oppression and isolation were indeed what she was experiencing.
Okay. So the isolation and oppression were maybe more reality-based, and then she maybe had some irrational thinking sort of overlapping with her odd ideologies?
Yes, and while it didn't seem that exact narrative was part of the teaching of the group, there was a narrative of that this small number of women in this small chosen group were responsible for the sins of the world. So there was that component as well, that some of the narrative that she had taken on had been a part of the teachings.
Okay. But as it relates to whether the beliefs that she articulated to you are religious teachings based and like genuinely held beliefs, or whether they're over here in the irrational mind that she's on her own independent thinking, whether they're in either category, did everything she articulate to you as her motivation relate to her essentially feeling like she needed to save Hannah?
Yes.
Okay. Did she ever articulate to you in any way that she felt threatened by Hannah?
No.
Did she ever articulate to you that she felt like she needed to defend anybody against Hannah?
No.
Did she ever indicate that Hannah was a danger to anyone around her?
No.
I want to talk to you specifically about what she told you. Obviously, would you agree with me that when we're talking about the question of what somebody's mental state is at the time they commit the crime, we have to look at the crime itself?
Correct.
And that's important for you to get as many details as possible surrounding the actual incident?
It's important to get as many details as possible surrounding the incident in order to compare the individual's narrative to what is indicated in collateral sources to hopefully understand on some level how lucid they were, what was their decision making like, and what were they thinking. Yes.
Okay. And when you say how lucid they were, what do you mean by that?
How clear were their thoughts? Were their thoughts reality based, and what were their thought processes overall?
Did you, and I can't recall, so refresh my memory, did you request or review any of the officer's body cam footage in this case?
I did not request it.
Okay.
I did not review it. In fact, I did not receive it, likely because I did specifically ask not to see visual images.
Okay. But if she was making statements on the scene minutes after she stabbed Hannah, would those things be relevant to how lucid she was and what her mental state was at the time?
They would be, and I believe some of those statements were articulated in the narratives, which I did review.
Okay. So you're aware that she said things on the officer's body cam like, is that it? Is that goodbye? With relation to her daughter dying?
I don't recall that specific statement. I do recall I want to see her one last time, and I think that is documented in my report.
Okay. And do you know anything about her making statements of let him be with her, let him be with her?
I do recall that.
Okay, and that's when officers were trying to make Benjamin leave the room?
I do recall that.
Do you recall any information about the EMT calling Hannah a boy and Chloe Driver correcting her and saying it's a girl?
I do not recall that. I don't dispute that, but I don't recall that.
Do you recall any information about something coming over the officer's radio saying the baby's being transported, and Chloe responds by saying, is she alive?
I don't specifically recall that. I recall that question after she was receiving treatment shortly after in the hospital when she had first started to seem to regain consciousness, but I don't recall that from the scene as they were leaving the home.
Okay. What did she report to you about, from the time she entered that room with Hannah, how much information and detail did she report to you? It's on page 36 of your report if you want to reference it. About what events took place in that room, what she did.
She was very detailed in her description of what took place in the room, and her detail was provided spontaneously, meaning that I did not have to ask a lot of guided questions. It was a very much a spontaneous narrative that she recalled becoming distressed. It seems that she was very much aware that she was having these thoughts of hurting herself and Hannah, and therefore did not want to be in a room by herself, and had attempted to go into the room with the other women, and Ben Michael motioned for her to go into the room alone. And she recalled Hannah not having on a diaper, only having on the rubber cover for the diaper, and asking for a diaper and a shirt, I believe. She recalled breastfeeding her. At some point prior to this, she'd gone back downstairs to get the knife, came into the room, locked the door, recalled getting the dirty shirt when she had asked for a clean shirt in order to make the child presentable, as they were anticipating going to a 12 Tribes meeting at some point in the immediate future. And she recalled getting the dirty shirt and feeling like that was another indication that she was supposed to do this. She was supposed to take her life in Hannah's. She recalled feeding her, calmly lying her down, and then taking the knife and attempting to kill both Hannah and herself.
Okay. And she told you that sort of Benjamin throwing her the dirty shirt was kind of what triggered her, that she wanted to kill herself and kill Hannah.
It was it was one of the things that triggered her that she described in this series of events in the hours and minutes proceeding. But yes, that I believe was the last thing that she described as being a triggering event.
Okay, and in your report on page 36, it says, from that moment on, I snapped, talking about the dirty shirt. Would those be her words?
Those are her words.
Okay. And you indicated that she said that she fed Hannah, and isn't it true that she said she fed her and then she laid her down on the bed and she was happy?
Yes.
Okay, and what did she say happened next?
Do you want me to read it word for word, or do you want me to recall from the best of my memory?
Well, I guess I'll kind of walk you through it.
Okay.
She indicated that she went down and grabbed a knife from the kitchen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she told you that she just grabbed a random knife out of the knife block and she didn't even look at it, right?
Correct.
And she went upstairs and she locked the door.
Correct.
Okay. Did you engage in any conversation with her about why she locked the door?
I did not.
Okay. And she indicated that she played a lot of video games, and that in the video games that she played, when you stab someone, they die immediately, right?
Correct.
And so she says, I have the knife, and I'm up here, and I'm up there. I don't know where to stab either of us, and I think the throat might kill us immediately. Is that what she told you?
Correct.
Okay. And so then she said she breastfed her, and she laid her down on the bed, and she was happy. Are you aware that she told another evaluator that when she laid her down on the bed before she stabbed her, she apologized to her?
I was not aware of that.
Okay, did she tell you that?
She did not. I do not recall her telling me that. I believe if she had told me that, it would be in my report in this paragraph.
Okay. And she then told you, I stabbed her in the throat, but she was not dead. She is just quiet and bleeding out, right?
Correct.
And I stabbed myself in the throat 3 times, and then you put in your report she made a twisting motion to demonstrate. What do you mean by that?
She kind of demonstrated what she was articulating verbally.
Okay. And she told you that at that point, after she had stabbed Hannah in the neck and stabbed herself in the neck, she's standing there wondering, why are we not dying?
Correct.
And at that point, she indicated she heard Z coming upstairs.
Correct.
And that he opened the door, and before he walked in, she was confused about why they weren't dying immediately, and so she tried to stab herself one more time in the heart.
Correct.
All right. And she indicated that in that moment, she thought that they were coming into the room to save them.
Correct.
And she didn't want to be saved because she didn't want to deal with all the pain that she imagined in the world.
Correct.
Okay. Safe to say that her memory about those events was very intact?
That was, yes.
Okay. You said, you want to assess whether somebody is lucid, their ability to sort of, what their thought process was. Like, why is it significant and important that somebody has a detailed memory of a particular event?
Well, during psychotic states, people can oftentimes be confused. Sometimes they are not. They can oftentimes be confused. So it's important to assess their level of confusion, how much they can recall. Also, it's very important to, one of the things we're always looking for in cases such as this one is the person a reliable informant, or are they fabricating information and fabricating symptoms in order to achieve a desired outcome. So it's important to compare their narrative to that of collateral sources. So the primary reason for understanding their description of the events is, one, to determine if it aligns or does not align with other sources of information in effort to determine if the person seems forthcoming or if they seem to be presenting information in effort to gain a desired outcome.
Okay. With regard to information that she may have reported to other evaluators, if she told Dr. Ballard when specifically asked if she knew whether her behavior was wrong, yeah, as soon as it happened, I regretted it. I thought I shouldn't have done this. This was not supposed to happen. Would that be consistent with how she presented to you?
Yes, she didn't state anything to me that indicated otherwise.
Okay.
It's not inconsistent with what she described to me.
Okay. And if she told Dr. Garrett she recalled apologizing to Hannah and telling her how much she loved her before she stabbed her, but she was at peace with it, but that she knew it was wrong from the beginning, would that be inconsistent with what she reported to you?
It's not inconsistent with what she reported to me.
Okay. And doctor, I took note in your report that you did not diagnose her with anything.
That is correct.
Why not?
So the experts in the field of psychology, the individuals who are experts on these types of evaluations, differ in their own opinions as to whether or not we should render a diagnosis in this type of evaluation. One school of thought says that a diagnosis helps the jury and the attorneys and helps psychologists in general to understand a person's mental state at the time. Even though it doesn't necessarily describe their mental state at the time, it helps us understand a set of symptoms and helps explain behavior. The other school of thought says that a diagnosis can be confusing because the diagnosis doesn't necessarily align all the time with mental state at the time of the offense, and people can make certain assumptions based on diagnosis alone and may make inadequate judgments. So in other words, it can be reckless to do so because a diagnosis can communicate to a layperson information that is not what we're intending.
Okay. And what school of thought were you in not diagnosing her in this criminal responsibility report?
So I did not render a diagnosis. My reason was it's not critical to answer the referral question. The referral question pertains to her mental state at the time of the offense, and a diagnosis would not necessarily explain her mental state at the time of the offense. The diagnoses that I considered, one, can have negative, people can have very negative assumptions when they see this diagnosis, and then another diagnosis, people automatically make assumptions about psychotic symptoms. So without having the opportunity to explain her mental state, I did not want for the diagnosis that I rendered to communicate information about what I perceived to be her mental state at the time of the alleged offense. I prefer to articulate that verbally rather than to put a diagnosis on a report and possibly not have the opportunity to explain it.
Okay. And is your thought process on that because whether or not she has a diagnosable mental illness is a question of medicine, and whether or not somebody is criminally insane is a question of law?
Correct.
And somebody can have a mental illness and not be criminally insane?
Correct.
And is that what you mean by sort of creating confusion?
In part, and someone can assume that a diagnosis means that mental health symptoms would not account for behavior at the time. So both situations, what you just said, and conversely, that someone could assume that other behaviors account for, that other explanations account for behaviors at the time of the alleged offense other than mental illness.
Okay. And I'm almost done, doctor, but I just want to sort of wrap up. You told us already that none of her delusions related to Hannah being a threat, harm, danger, or peril to her or anyone else, correct?
Correct.
And that all of her delusions related to Hannah and her need to kill Hannah was to save Hannah. Is that correct?
The delusions that involved Hannah seem to relate to her need to kill Hannah to save her, yes.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, Dr. Zahm. How are you?
Well, sir, thank you.
Just to follow up on that last set of questions, to be clear, Ms. Driver's delusions were not simply related to killing her daughter, correct? They were killing herself and her daughter, right?
Correct, and there were many delusional thought processes as well, but those that pertain to the alleged offense pertain to killing both herself and Hannah, correct?
And the action she took on December 8th was consistent with that delusion, meaning she stabbed her daughter and also attempted to kill herself, right?
Correct.
Okay. So let's kind of walk through your background. I may have missed this a little bit. You indicated that a lot of your forensic work after obtaining your doctorate was in Mississippi. Is that right?
Not after, before.
Before, okay.
During training.
How long were you there in Mississippi?
A year.
A year?
Correct.
And when did you get your PsyD? That's called.
I think I graduated in 2013. 2012, I'm sorry.
Forgot page. 2012, your PsyD, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then after that, you spent a year in Mississippi.
The year was before.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So 2011-ish in Mississippi.
2011 to 2012, correct.
Got your PsyD
In 2012, the end of 2012.
And then you came back to Georgia
Correct.
to start practicing.
Correct.
Okay. Did you begin work at that point in time in 2012 with Georgia Psychology?
I did not. I did not return to work immediately, and I did not begin work. And well, I did briefly. I did not continue. I did not continue continuously during that time frame.
Okay. So who did you first work for when you
Georgia
started?
Psychological.
Okay. And when was that? When did you start with them?
2012, end of 2012 or beginning of 2013.
Okay. So I guess I'm slightly confused there. How much work did you do for them?
So I worked with them for a year. I think there were about 3 years that my clinical work was minimal, and then I resumed work with them in 2015, and that is where I remained until this summer, until July 2024.
Okay, and I think you opened your own practice.
That is
over the
correct.
summer. Okay. All right, so you had a few years there where you weren't doing as much work with them.
Correct.
But got back to that in 2015. Okay, since 2015, I think your testimony earlier was you've done a lot of different evaluations at Georgia Psychological.
Correct.
Just general psychological evaluations of individuals, right?
Yes. Most of my work with Georgia Psychological pertained to child custody, child protective services.
Defects, as we refer to it.
Yes.
So-
Also some disability adjudication
Okay.
referral questions.
And you said that you had much less frequent requests for criminal responsibility exams that you've done in this case, right?
Correct.
How many criminal responsibility exams do you think you've done since 2015?
Since 2015, only a handful. I was heavily involved in criminal responsibility during my internship. Since 2015, only a handful. I would say 4 or 5.
Okay. And the one that you've conducted in this case with Ms. Driver, that was just in the last 6 months, right?
Correct.
You evaluated her in May of 2024.
Correct.
Okay. Of the, you said 4 or 5 roughly criminal responsibility exams?
Correct.
Is this the first exam that you conducted that you've actually had to testify about?
This
in a
is the
court
first
proceeding?
time. No, it isn't. This is the second
Okay.
that I've provided testimony.
Okay, so it's fair to say, Dr. Zahm, that, and you're familiar with this in conducting forensic evaluations back in Mississippi as well, many of the criminal responsibility exams that you would conduct, you generally do not testify about those in court, right?
Correct.
Because ultimately you believe that the person does not exhibit significant signs to be deemed insane under law. Is that right?
Yes, statistically, the number who are deemed, well, first, it's not a defense that is often presented, and secondly, the number who are deemed to fit the criteria is very small, even as a percentage of the number who present with that defense.
Correct.
So yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you have conducted criminal responsibility exams on behalf of defendants in cases. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And that process is typically where, based on the given facts of a case or circumstances that a lawyer has seen based on reviewing the evidence, they believe there might be an issue with a client and they are requesting you to make an evaluation, right?
That is my understanding of how it would come to me as a referral, yes.
At no time does any defense lawyer call you up and say, Dr. Zahm, I need you to find that this person is diagnosed with these mental health disorders so that we can create this defense.
No one has ever said that.
Okay. So whether or not to pursue a not guilty by reason of insanity or a competency evaluation in a case is based on the defendant's mental state that is presented in the facts of a case.
That is my understanding, absolutely.
Okay. Now, in this case, you indicated that you looked at various collateral sources that were provided to you, I think, by the DA's office.
That is
right?
correct.
And the list of those included her Chloe's medical records from Kennestone, right?
Correct.
Included the interviews from law enforcement, both with Ms. Driver and some of the other witnesses that were at the home at the date of this incident, right?
Correct.
You reviewed some cell phone searches, right?
Correct.
Some jail calls from Ms. Driver at the jail.
Correct.
And then this video that she recorded at the end of November with respect to going back to get her daughter, right?
Correct.
Did you review police reports from Asheville?
I did.
Okay. Was that one or two different police reports? Do you recall?
I think there is two, but I would have to reference my report to say that with certainty.
Okay. Let me ask you this way. Do you recall an incident where Ms. Driver was running out into the road
Yes.
trying to get away from Mr. Benyamin?
I do recall that.
Okay.
I recall that from her narrative as well as the police report, yes.
Okay. And then do you also recall a separate incident in which she called the police because Mr. Benyamin actually left with her child and took off with her?
Yes, I think I may not have been clear that that was in Asheville, but I do recall that incident as well. I think I may have presumed that that was at the location where her mother was residing, that
Okay.
call was placed.
And I'm not going to hold you to what's in those reports. We've actually heard testimony of witnesses that were there when those incidents happened. So, but you did review those?
Yes.
Okay. The cell phone searches that you reviewed, well, let me back up. The medical records that you reviewed, you don't find any dispute or disagreement with the medical records that indicated that Ms. Driver was suffering from delusions while she was in the hospital, do you?
That is correct. I think I cited in my report that I believed the sources of information that were presented over time to be highly consistent.
And she was also, I think, reporting some hallucinations while she was still in the hospital as well. Is that right?
I think that it was noted in the mental health records. I can't recall if they clearly articulated what those were, but I do recall that being noted in the mental health records from the hospital.
Okay. Those reports of delusions and hallucinations were consistent with other collateral sources that you had regarding Ms. Driver's state of mind leading up to this incident December 8th, right?
That is correct.
Reports from the other individuals that were interviewed were all reporting her state of mind or a destabilization of her mental state. Is that fair?
Correct.
And I think you also reviewed an audio recording that Mr. Benyamin had that he had provided to law enforcement on which she was talking about these delusions that she was experiencing, right?
Correct.
So it's clear, based on your review of the records, that Ms. Driver was absolutely going through stages of paranoia, experiencing delusions, and dealing with hallucinations in this build up to December 8th.
That is correct.
Okay. The cell phone searches, particularly, there are a couple of specific searches that she conducted, actually looking up the definition or the idea of schizophrenia. Is that right?
I recall the mention of schizophrenia. I would have to look at my report to know if she was looking up to see what it meant, but I do recall the mention of schizophrenia in one of her searches, correct?
Page 11 of your report, I think, Dr. Zahm, indicates the cell phone searches.
Yeah, I think
there.
it's just the word schizophrenia.
Okay. And she did that on 2 different days, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And she also looked up topics such as the whole world is programming me, correct?
Correct.
And she looked up on November 11th mental institutions in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Correct.
Now, were you aware her parents lived in Knoxville?
I was.
Okay. So is that possibly something she was looking at in order to try to get help for the issues she was dealing with?
It seems so, and she mentioned multiple times that she had tried to get help and had asked for help.
Yeah, she was telling Mr. Benyamin and the two other wives and the other people that she was around that she needed help for the issues that she was going through, right?
That is correct.
And you understood that this religious philosophy that Mr. Benyamin had was to exclude the access to traditional medical treatment, right?
That was my understanding.
I guess I should say modern day medical treatment, not traditional medical treatment, right?
That is my understanding.
He did not want Ms. Driver to be in a hospital, right?
That is my understanding.
In fact, he didn't even want Ms. Driver in a hospital when their child was born, right?
That was my understanding based on what she reported.
He did not want her to be institutionalized in any way, shape, or form, right?
That was certainly my understanding.
And he certainly didn't want her to be on any pharmaceutical drugs.
That was my understanding as well.
And she was telling you that because he didn't want her breastfeeding their child with medicine flowing through her body, right?
I don't know if that was stated as the reason that he didn't want that. My perception was that it seemed to be more so consistent with his overall beliefs. I don't recall it being specifically from his rationale about the breastfeeding. I do recall her mentioning having some concerns about what she would ingest in breastfeeding, but I believe my perception was that him not wanting her to have medication was part of his overall philosophy of how this group of people should engage with the world.
And it was clear to you also that she, in a sense, was somewhat rejecting that idea of his philosophy, right? Because
It did seem certainly that she had started to reject his philosophy.
even back to when the baby was born, she did not want to leave the hospital that quickly after the birth of the baby. Is that right?
That was my perception based on what she stated, yes.
She had indicated previous to the child's birth that she thought that they needed to be seeking prenatal care for the child, right?
That was my understanding.
And particularly in this instance, she was searching for mental health institutions. She was searching for schizophrenia as a way to understand what she was going through. Is that fair?
I don't believe I asked her exactly why she was researching schizophrenia, but I certainly would not dispute that.
Your medical opinion as a psychologist, someone that is suffering from paranoia and delusions and hallucinations, those are all symptoms that are consistent with somebody that could be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Is that fair?
With a psychotic disorder, yes.
Yeah. The other two evaluators in this case, Dr. Ballard and Dr. Garrett, do you know either of them?
I don't know them. I did listen to their testimony, but I do not know them prior to this hearing.
And you're aware, based on listening to their testimony, I know you didn't read their reports, but listening to their testimony, they both diagnosed Ms. Driver with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, correct?
Yes,
And borderline personality disorder, right?
correct.
Do you have any issues or take any issues with those diagnoses that they made?
I do not take issues with those diagnosis. I think it was clear from the history that she likely meets criteria for borderline personality disorder, as well as there are both mood symptoms and psychotic symptoms, which is captured by the diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, but could also be captured by other diagnoses. But yes, mood symptoms and psychotic symptoms are part of the clinical picture.
Okay. Yeah, you testified that there's a difference of opinion about whether or not in a forensic setting you should make a diagnosis.
Correct.
And I grant you that. You don't have any concern that Dr. Ballard and Dr.
No.
Garrett both made that.
No.
What you said you were considering some diagnoses. What were those diagnoses?
Borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or an unspecified psychotic disorder. I am very reluctant to diagnose schizoaffective disorder only because the particulars of that diagnosis, the minutiae details, are very difficult to capture from someone's self-report alone. So I'm very reluctant to assign that diagnosis if I didn't observe it within an inpatient setting.
Okay. Is it fair to say that your conducting this evaluation some 3.5 years after the incident would also affect your ability to make a specific diagnosis of her in terms of her symptoms that she was exhibiting at the time that this happened?
I think she was incredibly vivid in describing her symptoms, and the mental health records are voluminous. So I wouldn't have necessarily had concerns about assigning a diagnosis for that reason.
Okay. But at the end of the day, your diagnosis is pretty close to Dr. Garrett and Dr. Ballard.
That is correct.
All right. How long was your interview with Ms. Driver?
I believe that it was around 3 hours.
Okay. And it was on one day, correct?
It was.
When you met with her, she reported at the time that she had been on medication at the jail for some time, right?
Correct.
And I think in talking to you outside, you did indicate that you don't believe you received any jail medical records.
I don't believe that I received mental health records from the jail.
Okay. So you don't know specifically what medications she had been on while she was out there, other than what she reported to you?
So I know what she reported to me. She also was articulate in, I believe, stating what she previously was prescribed, and I believe that is noted within my report. It was also noted on some of the hospital records, what she was prescribed at the time of discharge. I will say that I don't speak to the specifics of what medications are prescribed for. Even though a Google search may say they're prescribed for one thing, I believe that should be left to the psychiatrist and the medical treatment providers. I'm not a prescribing physician, and my experience is that most medications are prescribed for different things. Even though they may primarily be used to treat one thing, they're also used to treat other things. So I would defer any questions about medication.
But at the time you interviewed her, your belief was that she had been on medication for some time.
Correct.
And that she seemed to be fairly stable on that medication.
She did note that she had been taken off one medication and that she had experienced an increase in some symptoms, not psychotic symptoms. It seems she'd gotten into a fight, and that was out of character for her. So she had been on some medication for a very long time, but it seemed that medication had been changed.
Okay. But she, as far as it related to her psychotic symptoms, such as the delusions and hallucinations, the medication that she was on had been addressing those.
That was my belief, yes.
Okay. And that is how you perceived her when you were interviewing
Yes.
her, right?
She did not seem psychotic when I interviewed her.
Okay. Dr. Zahm, someone like Ms. Driver that had exhibited the symptoms that she, as you talked about, was clearly showing to others, the paranoia, the delusions, the hallucinations, before this incident. If someone is experiencing those things and is not getting treatment, is it fair to say that her condition will continue to worsen?
It's certainly expected in most cases that someone who is experiencing psychotic symptoms will continue to deteriorate in the absence of medication.
Is it also fair to say that someone that is not being treated for those illnesses and experiencing those symptoms, those delusions that she is hearing and receiving, it is going to grow harder and harder for her to not succumb to those?
So mental health symptoms, psychotic symptoms can be transient. They can come and go. They can worsen and lessen in severity. However, she was also in a stressful situation. So yes, it would be highly unlikely that her condition would spontaneously improve in the absence of treatment or removal of a stressor.
And it's clear from some of her cell phone searches that she was having these delusions about killing herself. She was actually searching things to kill someone, right?
Yes.
Now, there's no indication that she was searching to kill herself or someone else, just searching to kill some person, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And she was searching for other things as well in a manner to basically extricate herself from the environment that she was in.
Correct.
Even on the December 8th, where she was searching for a bus ticket.
Correct.
For her child, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me talk to you about delusions to kill somebody. If I'm suffering a delusion that I need to kill the judge, and the judge knows I know her very well, I think she's a great judge, so that would clearly be a delusion in our sense. But hypothetically, if I'm suffering from a delusion and that delusion is telling me that I have to kill her for whatever reason that is it common that in that delusional state I would search for a weapon?
It's not uncommon.
It would be consistent with my thinking in that delusional state that if I have to kill her, I have to do something to do that, correct?
Correct.
I have to find a weapon, a gun, a knife, some type of object for which I can carry out my plan, correct?
It's not unexpected.
Right. So if I did not have a weapon, I might search around for one, right? Like I might look, where's a weapon in this room that I can grab? What can I do with it, right?
Certainly.
But that's being done in that delusional state because I'm not capable at that point in time of thinking that, whoa, this isn't the right move, right? I'm delusional.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, a delusion is a fixed false belief in an idea, right?
Correct.
So if I have a fixed false belief that I have to carry out a plan to kill somebody, my mentality is going to tell me do whatever it takes for me to carry out that goal, right?
That is correct. I do think it's important to state that while she was suffering from delusions, her delusions were not as fixed as they are in some situations, which is also apparent in her internet searches. She's going back and forth between questioning the ideas of what she's being taught, questioning her own ideas, trying to look for a bus ticket to escape her situation while also looking up ways to kill someone. So yes, delusional, yes, she was suffering from delusions, not as entirely fixed as we do see in some situations.
But those situations, as far as how fixed or how severe those delusions are going to change over time, right?
For many people, they do. For someone with a purely delusional disorder, they may not. But for someone with her, what we believe to be her diagnosis, yes, we would expect her symptoms to fluctuate over time.
Between sanity and insanity, and I know that's
And it's a spectrum of varying degrees.
And she told you that on December the 8th, they woke up and went to a 12 Tribes meeting that morning, correct?
Correct.
And she told you that at that 12 Tribes meeting, they talked about death, and she interpreted that discussion about death as a delusional reference to her that she needed to kill herself.
I do believe I recall her talking about the meaning she assigned to the 12 tribes, perceiving that to be a message to her that she needed to kill herself, that she needed to do it.
And she took that message, in her mind, she took that message as, this has got to be the day that this happens, at the time, right?
That seems correct with what she told me, yes.
And when they got to Canton that day, around lunchtime, she was forced to go up into a room by herself, is that right?
That is correct.
And she was forced to be in that room, even though she was telling Mr. Benyamin she did not want to be alone.
That is what she reported, yes.
Because of what she had already been experiencing that
That
day,
is
right?
correct.
She took the sign of being by herself in that room alone, again, as an additional signal that she needed to kill herself.
Correct.
And then ultimately, she told you that the final straw, as it were, was getting this dirty shirt sent up to her, right?
Correct.
And she interpreted that dirty shirt as the last signal to her that she was not capable of living. She and her child were not capable of living, right?
Yes, I don't think those were her exact words, capable, but yes, she took it to mean that they weren't worth anything.
It was consistent with her delusions that she had been experiencing that entire day, beginning that morning they woke up, right?
Correct.
And it was at that point where she got the shirt that she went downstairs to get this knife, right?
I believe that is correct.
Any further questions of this witness?
Just briefly, a moment ago, you said that she took the dirty shirt to mean that they weren't worth anything. So her viewpoint of why she carried out the act at that moment, as she expressed to you, was that in that moment she felt like her and Hannah were worthless.
I would have to go back and read my words to know directly, but I recall her saying when she got this shirt, it meant that it was her language if they weren't worth anything. I don't know if I took that to mean that they were worthless.
All right. And you indicated that Ms. Driver's delusions were not as fixed as some.
Right.
She had significant periods of lucidity and stability and ability to engage with the world around her.
Yes, someone with a diagnosis of a delusional disorder has very fixed delusions that do not fluctuate over time and are impossible to challenge. The nature of her mental illness was such that she was fluctuating and questioning different sets of beliefs at different times.
Okay. And some of those questioning sets of beliefs may have been related to her religious ideological views?
Yes.
Okay. And some of it may have been related to her mental health?
Correct. She articulated times at which she questioned her own mental health symptoms.
Okay. And Mr. Kessler asked you about, that she was begging these people for help and that they weren't giving it to her. Did she indicate to you at all when her and Hannah went and spent 2 days with her mother just prior to the murder whether or not she sought out treatment or assistance from her parents?
I don't recall if she articulated the particulars of seeking out treatment. I do recall that she stated that while she was there, she then started to become paranoid of her parents and of the things that were going on around her.
Okay. And you indicated that you had reviewed some jail communication prior to your evaluation of her.
Correct.
Were you at any time aware of anyone communicating to Ms. Driver that if she acted normal in your evaluation, she would be screwing herself?
I am.
Okay. And who was that?
Her father.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Anything else of this witness? All right, thank you, Ben. You may be excused. All right.